believe it or not, today marks the 3-month mark in the Sermon on the Mount. So we go through books of the Bible here. That's how I'm convicted the church is best served. There's a consistent pattern of preaching through books and longer sections of a book. And the Sermon on the Mount is 3 chapters in the book of Matthew. It's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And today marks the 3-month mark. You know, you're like, Paul, we get it already. But here's the deal. Like, even when we think we get it already, we still don't. So I type out a sermon manuscript. Almost every word I say on Sundays, 40 minutes, maybe like 5 minutes is off text and 35 minutes is right here. But I type out almost a complete manuscript. And even this week, after having been typing Sermon on the Mount for 3 months every week and multiple times throughout the week, I wrote Sermon on the Mountie, and I'm not Canadian. No, seriously, like, it's good. I'm not Canadian. Like, I wrote Sermon on the Mountie, like that Y, even for 3 months, I still hit that Y with my finger, which is just funny to me. So, like, maybe by the end of next week, when we're done, maybe I'll write a Sermon on the Mount instead of Sermon on the Mountie. So that's just a little fun for you. So just so everyone knows where we're going, next week we will finish the Sermon on the Mount, and then we'll have 2 open Sundays that are not in a series. And then in September the 22nd, we're going to start a fall series through the book of 1 Timothy. So there are 3 books that Paul wrote to these 2 young pastors, 2 letters to Timothy and 1 to Titus, where he said, hey, I know you're leading a church, and the church is growing, and there are some things that you need to deal with, and some strategies or whatever that you need to deploy. But here's how the church should move forward. And so where we are in a church, it's time for us to start looking at the pastoral letter of 1 Timothy. One of my favorite books in the Bible, and you guys know, if you know me, it's I like to call him T-Bone. I like to imagine that Paul and Timothy had this relationship where Paul likes to give his protégés nicknames, and he called him T-Bone. I can't prove that, but that's just, when I see it, that's how I like to do it. So that's where we're going. Fall series will start on September 22nd. You want to be here for that. We're going to go verse by verse through the book of 1 Timothy. But this morning, in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 23, some incredibly strong words of Jesus, and words so strong. One of the authors I read this week, he said, if these words were given by anyone else, we wouldn't believe them. Because these words in Matthew 7, 13 through 23 are so strong. He said that only because they're by Jesus, only because they've been recorded, the words of Jesus, would we ever even think they were part of the Bible, because they are that strong. And really, while all of Matthew chapter 7 deals with judgment, from verse 13 to the end of the sermon, we're really in the application point. So for 2.5 chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and the first part of 7, Jesus has been preaching and teaching like this is what a citizen of the kingdom of heaven looks like, and then he turns to the application. So this is what you do with it. And now he has been giving us application all along, but this is that kind of that so what moment in the sermon. Like, okay, you've taught us all this stuff, now what do we do with it? And that's the part where we're going to deal with today and next week, the application points. What does it look like to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven? How should I live? What do I do? And what I want to suggest this morning in the 11 verses we have from 13 to 23, I want to suggest is that Jesus is pointing us to the truth that religion is not a hobby, that religion actually makes a terrible hobby. And I think so many people treat their religion as a hobby. If we're not careful, we'll treat following Jesus as just another hobby. So some of you know that I love to ride a bicycle. I love to ride a bicycle. Like, I carve out as much time in my week as I can manage to ride a bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle. Isn't that a song? Yeah, that's right.
Queen.
What's that? Queen, yes. Bicycles, bicycles. I won't sing anymore. I love to ride a bicycle. Like, I got golf clubs in my garage that just sit in the corner. Like, I could take or leave golf. I never thought when I was 20 that I would say that, but I could take or leave golf. But I love to ride a bicycle. It's my hobby. It's my hobby. I spend time doing it. I try to find time anywhere from 2 to 4 days a week when I can get on a bicycle. Sometimes, like you see, I've got 2 really distinct tan lines, and they're on my hands because I wear gloves. So like my hands, and then the rest of my arm. And then I have one over here, which is this emergency contact bracelet that I wear in case I get killed, because there really are, it's kind of dangerous to ride a bicycle in Bradenton. In case I get killed, it says on my bracelet who to call. It says that you call my wife. And I noticed this just yesterday, I have a very distinct tan line right on my wrist, right here, where that bracelet sits. In case I ever get hit by a car, they'll know to call Victoria. I love to ride a bicycle. It's important to me. But at the end of the day, it's still just a hobby. It's still just a hobby, one that I really enjoy, but it's still just a hobby. And you know what? If you look at my riding logs, which they're all on the internet, if you look at my riding logs, you'll see like 6-day stretches without even touching a bicycle. Sometimes in the summer, when 4 children are out of school, my schedule gets kind of crazy sometimes, and you may even see 2 or 3 weeks without a single bicycle ride. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because it's just a hobby. Because riding my bicycle is just a hobby to me. I'm afraid many of us treat our devotion for Christ like I treat riding my bicycle. We may enjoy it, we may fit it in when it's convenient. We may like to claim that we're a cyclist, but you hadn't really ridden your bicycle in 4 weeks. What I would suggest to you is that religion makes a terrible hobby, and I think that's the sentiment behind these 11 verses. That religion makes a terrible hobby. So if you have a Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 7, and I'm just going to leave my bike up here. We're going to think through this. And it's just going to be an illustration of my hobby for all of us this morning. Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 23. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. Be on your guard against false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit. Neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that doesn't produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, so you'll recognize them by their fruit. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? Then I will announce to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers. Let's pray over this text and we'll look at it. Heavenly Father, God, you are so good and so gracious, and so kind, and so loving, compassionate, merciful, holy, just, and righteous. God, we love you. Father, God, I pray over each one of us today. Lord, I pray that your text, your scripture, your spirit would move in our hearts, that your word and your spirit would work together in our lives, God. Change us today. In Jesus' name, amen. If we think about the fact that religion makes a terrible hobby, think about it, that's going to be our main idea. I think the first thing we need to look at is the narrow gate. Jesus says here in verse 13, enter through the narrow gate. The first point is that we have to enter through the gate. We have to enter. We are not born through the gate. We don't arrive in the gate on the narrow path. We have to enter. Something has to change in our lives to draw us into the narrow gate. We aren't born neutral. We aren't born on the good road. We are born in sin, every one of us. The Bible says every one of us bears the guilt of Adam, dead in our sin, and we have to enter through the narrow gate. Something has to change in our lives for us to find the narrow gate. It's not going to happen on accident. It's not going to happen if we just hop in the water and let the current take us. Because you know where the current takes you? Down the broad road that leads to destruction. See, I like to think of this as a picture of a turnstile. It's a one at a time kind of a thing. It's narrow. Better yet, think about walking down the aisle of an airplane. Think about the last time you flew, get all the way to the back. Victoria and I were flying home from somewhere, and we were in the, was it the back row or the second to back row?
Second to back.
And you know what? I carry this backpack. I don't use a briefcase anymore. I use a backpack. And I got this backpack, and even me, just busting down this kind of sidestepping, I'm still hitting people with my backpack. Right? The gate that Jesus calls us to walk down, we can't even carry our backpack through. It's one at a time. You leave all of your luggage behind. Imagine on that airplane if they even made those aisles even narrower. Even narrower. You can't take anything with you. You can't take anyone with you. One at a time. And this morning, I came in. So Friday we set up like normal because I didn't want anybody to know what we were doing. But you notice we got a pretty narrow middle road this morning. And that's on purpose. And you know what's at the end of that middle row this morning? It's the Lord's Supper, the bread and the juice, which we will celebrate at the end of our service in remembrance of what Christ has done. And that's on purpose. And at the end of our service, followers of Jesus, Christians in the room are going to be invited to go to the back table. And I'm going to ask you to go down this narrow road as a picture of following Christ this morning, that we can't go 2 by 2 and it's not wide. It's not 4 feet wide like it usually is. It's super narrow. And, there may be things that you have to navigate around, but it's super narrow. But at the end is Jesus. It's these elements that represent what Jesus has done for us. See, that's the narrow gate. You come by yourself, but you get Jesus, and I'll take it. You leave your dreams behind. You can't take your family, as much as I would love to believe for my kids. I can't believe for them. As much as I would love to believe for my wife, I can't believe for her. It's one at a time. But you know what's waiting for me is Jesus. And I'll take it every single time. I will take it. It's difficult, Jesus says. How narrow is the gate? It's verse 14. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. It leads to life in Jesus, period. It is not easy, but it is so worth it. It is so worth it. And the people that find it will tell you how hard it is, but will tell you how glorious Jesus is. Because they'll know that He is with them every step. Even when you can't step, He is stepping for you. He never leaves us, and He's always with us, and He's leading us down the path that leads to life. Find life this morning. Don't find a hobby. Religion makes a terrible hobby. Jesus isn't calling us to follow Him like I ride my bicycle. No matter how many miles I put on this bicycle, guess what? I am not a cyclist. Because riding a bicycle isn't the most important thing in my life. It's about the 8700th thing in my life. So no matter how many miles I put on this bicycle, I am not a cyclist. Because cycling is just a hobby. You can't take anything with you, not your family, not your career, not your own selfish desires, whatever that is. Whether that's doing well in school, whether that's just trying to get good grades to make mom and dad happy, whether that's finishing a college degree, whether that's comfortable retirement, whatever that is, it won't fit down the aisle with you. Jesus told people to count the cost. He said, count the cost of following me. One dude said, let me go back and bury my dad. He said, nope. One dude had tons of money. And Jesus said, go, sell all you got, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Like, there is a very real cost to following Jesus. We don't follow him like we take up hobbies, because religion makes it a terrible hobby. We go down the narrow gate, one at a time. And we know that others are with us. Because while we go one at a time, we know that we're doing life together in community. And we know that Jesus is with us every step of the way. There really are only two ways. One, the narrow, hard, the difficult gate that leads to life, and the other that leads to destruction. That is just easy and makes no claims on anything. Just like riding a bike makes no claim on my life. That's the path that leads to destruction. And Jesus says that few will find it. That really should be a wake-up call to all of us this morning, that few will find it. Few will find it. I just want to ask you, make sure you're on that narrow road today. Like, don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till tonight. Make sure you're on that narrow road. Make sure that you have entered through the narrow gate. That's through repentance and faith in Jesus. Not in a concept of God. Not in like God bless America. But like Jesus, the God of the universe that came and lived a perfect life and has been calling men and women, boys and girls to himself for 2,000 years, to find faith in him, to find purpose and meaning, not a hobby, but purpose and meaning. And as you travel down this road, Jesus says you better watch out, because there will be people that will try to lead you away. He says, there's this fruit of false teachers in verse 15. Be on guard against false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. Now you say a picture says 1,000 words. Take a look at this picture that has a zipper. It's like a wolf with a zipper, unzipping the sheep's clothing. That's what false teachers really are. And Jesus says, as you come down this narrow road, be on guard against false teachers who come to you like ravaging wolves. Like wolves are ripping anything apart that gets in their way. They will rip anything apart that gets in their way. And Jesus wants to make sure that as you're on this road, to know that people will try to lead you away, and don't let it happen. What does sheep's clothing look like? Well, some may say blue jeans and flip-flops. Some may say business suits, whatever. I don't really care. It's not about how they're dressed. It's about what they say and what they don't say, what they do and what they don't do. And I think there's two types of false teachers. There's the hypocrites and the heretics. The hypocrites and the heretics. You got to be on guard against both of them. Now, this is not a call to be on guard against the TV preacher. This is not a call to be on guard against every kind of garbage that has been, so, quote unquote, Christianized and sold millions of books. It's not a call there. It's a call to be on guard against the teaching in the local church. The teaching in the local church, the teaching in your small group, the teaching in your discipleship group. Maybe you're in a group of 2 or 3 people. The teaching that your friends and family and people that you care about are sitting under. Like, this is... Think about this call as through the local church. Like, I can't do nothing about some prosperity guy who's selling garbage. I can do a lot about what happens here. I can do a lot about what happens here in our local church. So we got to be on guard against the heretics and the hypocrites. And here's how we need to be on guard against them. We need to listen. We need to listen. Not just listen to what they say, but listen to what they don't say. We listen to what they say, and we listen to what they don't talk about. Because there's lots of heretics that talk about how great Jesus is. But they probably don't mention a whole lot about the sinfulness of our own hearts. And about how righteous God is. And the wrath of God that will be poured out on all people that are apart from Christ. More often, we hear a heretic just being a heretic of omission because they're not speaking certain key truths. Does your preacher and teacher in your church preach the Bible, all of the Bible, or do they like to hang out in their own opinions and their favorite passages? That's a good way to be on guard against false teaching. Does your preacher or your teacher or your small group leader teach all of the Bible or just the parts that they like? Will they humbly receive your questions about what they are saying and what they aren't saying? Humbly receive your questions about what you're saying and what they aren't saying. Do they have a high view of scriptures? See, these are just a few just easy diagnostic questions when you're sitting under any preaching and teaching. Let me just tell you another thing. You know how many of you it takes to throw me out as your pastor? 2/3 of our covenant members can remove me as your pastor. Do you know that? 2/3 of our covenant members, people that have affirmed the covenant, the Redemption Church, Manatee, Church Covenant, 2/3 of the members of our covenant members can throw me out as your pastor. I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of that. If you have a problem with something that I'm not saying or something that I am saying, call me. Let's have coffee. That's my favorite meal of the day, coffee. And we'll talk about it. And I'll humbly receive your questions. Because I believe God's called me to the ministry of the Word. And as best as I can, I'm trying to do what He's called me to do, to preach, to teach, to share the beauty of this book, in all of this book, Genesis to Revelation. In Paul's second letter to his protege, T-Bone, 2 Timothy, he says, 2 Timothy 4, verses 3 and 4, he says, "For the time will come when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. They will turn away from hearing the truth and will turn aside to myths." People will elevate teachers that say the things that they like, things that make zero claim, the things that treat their religion like a bicycle hobby. That time will come. Some would say it's even here. As we travel down the narrow gate, Jesus is so concerned that we don't be derailed by a false teacher. And he tells us, he said, look at the fruit. He says in verse 16, you'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. Now, some people think this is a picture of like an alive tree and a dead tree, but I don't read it that way. Here's how I understand this text. He said, you got two trees that are living, two trees that are growing, and two trees that are bearing fruit. Only problem is one's good fruit and one is corrupted fruit, like an apple that you wouldn't want to eat. Picture this. We went to Sam's. Our family went to Sam's last Sunday. And I don't know if you buy at Sam's, but you can get a great deal on produce at Sam's. Like if you buy produce, fruit. We have a family of 6, so we go through lots of food in our house. So we'll go to Sam's, try to save a few dollars. And I bought me a big bag of apples. Honeycrisp apples. Anybody ever have a Honeycrisp apple? That's like, my goodness, that is a glorious fruit. Like, I don't know if that's some crazy genetic engineering or if I just discovered it a few years ago, but that is the best apple on the shelf for my money, but they're too expensive. So we buy them at Sam's because they're more affordable at Sam's. And we picked up this 4-pound bag of Honeycrisp apples, and I was so excited because they looked so good in that bag. And then I get to Sunday night, and I'm helping Victoria because she's got so much on her plate right now at the start of school. I'm helping her get her lunch squared away, and I take out an apple, and an apple the size of a baseball has a spot on it. That's going to make about 1/3 of it unedible, like a rotten spot. You can just cut it off. But like what looked so good from the outside, this 4-pound bag of Honey Crisp, I pulled one out. And it wasn't until I looked closely did I see that rotten spot on it. Sean Kuss, you noticed the same thing, didn't you, buddy? When you got your apple, you noticed the same thing. See, I think the picture here that Jesus is giving us is a picture of two trees that appear to be growing. Two trees that are growing. One produces good fruit. One produces awful fruit, like corrupted fruit, dead fruit. And the challenge is to make sure that we don't get fooled. We don't get fooled by the dead and terrible fruit. And here's what I think. Here's what the Bible teaches, the type of fruit you should look for in a teacher and pastor. And when we're in our series in 1 Timothy this fall, we're going to see the qualifications of an elder, pastor, overseer, whatever word you use. The Bible uses those three words interchangeably. We're going to see the qualifications of an elder, pastor, overseer of the local church. Here's what Paul would write in Galatians chapter 5. He says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The law is not against such things. I mean, that's a good starting point. Like, we're going to listen to somebody. We need to see the fruit, not the fruit of perfection, but the fruit of the Spirit growing in their lives, because that is fruit worth eating. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. John the Baptist talked a lot about bearing the fruit of repentance. We must be so careful who we listen to. Do you see a growing love for Jesus and his church in your primary teacher, the Word of God? Do you see a growing love for Jesus and his church in your primary teacher, the Word of God? I think that's an indication that he's bearing good fruit. Do you hear in his voice or in his tone in everyday life how much he loves Jesus? Does he quickly and readily point to the glory of God's grace in his life and the life of the local church? Like, deflect the glory off of your teacher onto Jesus. Because Jesus isn't going to share glory with any false teacher. I promise you. He will not share his glory. I hope that's the type of fruit we really see in every follower of Jesus. See, the call on leaders are really just the call to all Christians to follow Jesus in this way. And we must absolutely see this fruit in our teachers in the church. Not perfection. Nowhere does it say perfection, but productive fruit, like good fruit. What do you do? So here's another question we have to deal with. Because the text deals with it like, what do you do if you find yourself in a church with a false teacher? What do you do? Because Jesus says, be on your guard against false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You will recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that doesn't produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, so you'll recognize them by their fruit. What do you do if you're in a church and you recognize that, that's kind of bad fruit? Here's what I would do. Follow the Scriptures. Follow the Scriptures. The Scriptures are our guide for all things, faith and life. In 2 Timothy 5, it says, don't bring a charge against an elder except on 2 to 3 witnesses. Chances are, if your primary teacher's fruit is bad, other people will know it. So ask people that you trust. Say, hey, Paul's kind of been going off the rails the last few weeks. What do you think? And then just listen. Find a believer that you trust and say, Paul's, I'm concerned for Paul. I'm concerned for Paul. What do you think? And then if 2 or 3 people are in agreement with you, go to them. Go to me. Go to your primary teacher of God's word. Humbly, and ask him, hey, we have some concerns. Can you help us? If that doesn't work, find a new church. If that doesn't work, find a new church. And I understand, like, I'm saying this as pastor of the church you're listening to, but 2/3 of you could throw me out. I think we have 18 covenant members at RCM. So it would take 12 to throw me out. That's what the word says. Don't bring an accusation or a charge against an elder except on 2 to 3 witnesses. So if there's problems with my teaching, I would hope that you would love me enough to help show me. That's really what it boils down to. Like, will you love me and will you love my kids and my wife enough to say, Paul, Matt, John, and I have been concerned about some of your teaching. Can we have a cup of coffee? And I would hope that I would say, okay. Jesus is warning us here about religion as a hobby. He gives us this narrow and broad road, this narrow gate, this broad road. He calls us to be on guard against teachers that would try to derail us. And he calls us not just to be careful what we listen to, but he would also say, test your own belief. In verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father. See, I want us to think that that is a test of our own belief. And what that says is that there is a type of belief that leads to life. Just like there are 2 roads, there's the narrow gate and the broad road. One leads to life, one leads to destruction. There is a type of belief that leads to destruction. Because notice it says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord. Or, excuse me, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. Like, that's right belief. Acknowledging who Jesus is. That's right belief. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. That's the type of belief James wrote about. The demonic type of belief where it says that even the demons believe and they shudder. This week I was reading and I saw a quote from a pastor who's long since gone to be with Jesus. His name was A.W. Tozer, an incredible author, an incredible passion for the glory of God and Christ, the person, work, and ways of Jesus. And he said, the devil is a better theologian than any of us, and he's still a devil. The devil knows more about Jesus than any of us, and he's still the devil. Let that sink in. As Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Some will acknowledge who Jesus is. They'll say, Lord, Lord, yet will never submit to him as Lord. It's one thing to say he is Lord. It's another thing to submit to him as Lord. What's the difference? It's how we apply this book. What do we do with this book? Do we follow what Jesus says in this book like a soldier? Do we read it like a scholar? Do we admire it like a novel? We must submit to Jesus as Lord. Notice too that not only did they believe rightly, they were excited about their belief. It didn't say, not everyone who says to me, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. That repeated emphasis says, like, there's an excitement, a zeal for this type of belief. They'll acknowledge all of the right things about Jesus, but never once do what he says, and it's demonic type of belief, according to James. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Who does the will of my Father in heaven. You know the difference between me as a guy who really likes to ride a bicycle and a guy who's a cyclist? cyclist wakes up in the morning, and every single thing he or she does revolves around this bike. Everything, food or drink that they put into their bodies revolves around this bike. Every weight they lift or don't lift revolves around this bike. The clothing that they wear revolves around this bike. The time they go to bed at night revolves around this bike. The places they go throughout the day revolves around this bike, because they're a cyclist. They're not a guy that likes to ride a bicycle. It's a huge difference. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. How do you know if you're a Christian? How do you know if you're on the narrow gate? Have you turned to Jesus? Have you asked him to forgive you? And if you said, yes, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go, regardless of the cost. Whatever you say I will do, my answer is yes. It's a pattern of self-denial where we turn from ourselves and we turn to Jesus. That's the type of belief that honors him. It's a belief that acts in accordance to his will and his purposes in the world. It's not that we work to earn our position before God. We can't earn anything before God. Jesus has done that for us. If you're a follower of Jesus, he has done that for you. But what he has done in your life and for you will make commands on your life. It's the command of obedience. But only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Sounds like all of James' book right there. I think there's a difference between religious activity and a devotion to Christ. A heart level from all of our being, not just our emotions, but our mind, our emotions, our will, the will of my being devoted to Jesus. There's a difference between religious activity and devotion to Jesus. It's how we live, and we don't do it perfectly. Some of you have heard me say a lot about not perfection, but progress. I know I'm not the same man I was in June, in April, in February, because I can see the grace of God at work in my own life. And Lord, help me, I will not be in October the man I am today, in August. And I pray the same for you. How do we get there? How do we get there? What's the answer? How can we make sure we're not falling into this religion as hobby type of belief, this demonic type of belief that James would say that even the demons believe and they shudder? I think we must be overwhelmed by the glory and greatness of Jesus. That we run to him in faith, that we see Jesus for who he is. God of the world, pre-existed before creation, active in creation, as Paul would write, that by him, for him, and through him, all things were created. We see him for who he says he is and who this book points to him as. We see him for who he is, and then we run to him with complete surrender. Say, Jesus, every aspect of my life is on the altar before you. How I live, how I spend, how I eat, you fill in the blank, how I work, how I go to school, how I love my husband or my wife, how I love my future husband or my future wife, how I love my kids, how I honor my parents, how every single aspect of my life is yours, and I want it to conform to your will. That's how we get there. We see the glory of Jesus and we run to him and surrender. Not like I ride my bicycle, but we want to become cyclists. In Romans chapter 3, verses 21, Paul gives us this picture. He says, but now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed, attested by the law and the prophets. The righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ. Hear this, to all who believe. And see, Paul's not talking about that demonic type of belief that acknowledges who Jesus is but makes no claim. Paul's talking about the type of belief that surrenders all on the altar before Christ and says, whatever you want, I'm yours. He says, to all who believe in Romans chapter 3. It says there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That is the bad news. We learn the bad news in our kids program, but let's hear the good news. Verse 24, they are justified freely by his grace through the redemption. That's purchasing. That's being bought. That's a legal transaction that you have a right and I want to pay for it. I want to redeem you. I want to buy you. He says you have been redeemed. He said they are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented to him as an atoning sacrifice in his blood, received through faith to demonstrate his righteousness. Because in his restraint God passed over the sins previously committed. God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so that he would be righteous and declare righteous the one who has faith in Jesus. Do not hear these words and leave here not knowing what it means to have faith in Jesus. It's to believe rightly and act in accordance to the word, surrendering everything we are. That's what faith in Jesus is. Do not leave here today. And let me tell you, it may cost you. It may cost you. It may cost you. Because the gate's narrow. One at a time. One at a time. No room for luggage. It cost you everything. Jesus is worth it. He's worth it. The glory of Jesus is worth it. I'm going to close this in a word of prayer. And then I'm going to ask, before we step back and take the elements, I'm going to ask our band to start leading us in the song that they've prepared for our time of worship through the Lord's Supper. And I just want some space this morning for each of us just to consider the words like, do we have this type of faith that Paul writes about, that Jesus points us to, that all of the law and the prophets pointed us to, this type of faith that isn't just an acknowledgement of who Jesus is, but it's a surrender to who Jesus wants us to be, to him, that we surrender everything. And do we have this type of faith? And I just want to provide some space for us to pray and to consider, like, do I have this type of faith? Here's what I want you to do. And the answer to that question is no. I want you to take that card that was on your seat, then check that box that says, tell me more about the gospel. Because that is the gospel. That is the good news of Jesus that he calls us to himself. And I will call you, or someone from our church will call you before the sun goes down tonight. That's my commitment to you. If you check that box that says, tell me more about the gospel, someone from our church will call you before the sun goes down tonight. And so I just want to give us space to consider that question this morning as we look at the words of Jesus. And then after part of our music, I'll point us to take the elements in the back table for those that are followers of Jesus. Heavenly Father, God, I just pray that, Lord, that you would overwhelm us by your grace and your mercy today, God, that someone in this room that doesn't know you would leave here today knowing you. Father, that every person here would leave here today changed. God, you are a good and gracious God, and we love you. It's in Jesus' name I pray.